everyone, and welcome back to the Innovation Stage. I'm Lisa Moyle, Director of Strategy at VC Innovations, and I'm delighted to be moderating a panel looking at the future of the branch, a topic which for many really elicits some strong emotions and viewpoints. So I look forward to hearing those from our speakers and hearing the views also from those of you who are watching. So if you are watching and you have any questions you want to pose to the panel or to express your own views about the future of the branch, please paste those in the chat that you see on your screen and we'll do our best to respond. If you want to reach out to any of our panel directly, please, you can use the People's tab on the top right-hand side of your screen to send them a message. You can visit our partners in the expo area. So make the best use of all those functions. But for now, I want to pass over to my panel to introduce themselves. And can we please start with you, David?
Yeah, of course. Hi, Lisa. Great to be here. My name's David Marlowe. I'm the Chief Executive of the Nottingham Building Society. We're a society with around about £4 billion of assets. We've got a reasonably large branch network of 48 branches, but we've also just launched a brand new app-led savings capability under the Beehive Money brand.
Brilliant. Thanks, David. And we look forward to hearing more about that. Over to you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Lisa. Great to be here. I'm John Hull. I was formerly Head of Resourcing Delivery at Nationwide and now an interim talent consultant, currently working with the Principality. Just really interesting looking at this problem through the talent lens and what talent you need for the future of the branch or hybrid working for customers.
Thanks for that, Jonathan. And if we could pass over to you now, Stewart.
Hi there. Yeah, thanks for having me again today. Stewart Fern, I am Head of Customer Contact for Newcastle Building Society. My primary responsibility is the strategy and the running of the branch network, though, so it's a key point for today, probably. Thank you.
Thanks for that. And Joe?
Thanks, Lisa. My name is Jo Howes. I'm Sales Director at FinTech OS, and FinTech OS is a technology business. We deliver a next generation technology as a service platform for all financial service organisations, including building societies and banks, with the need to accelerate innovation through digital transformation processes.
Thanks, Joe. And again, I'm sure we'll be revisiting some of those themes throughout the course of our conversation. So David, I wondered if we could start with you, and then I'm going to put a similar question to both Jonathan and Stewart. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the broader trends that you've seen with the use of bank branches?
Yeah, of course. I think obviously it's a very emotive subject, branches. It elicits a strong response from most people. I think we have a pretty clear view that the branches do have a future, but it's a future that looks probably quite different from that it has done in the past. I think in the past, the branch was seen as a universal access point to service to financial services organisations, and obviously that's carried with it quite a large sort of transaction base. We believe that the branch of the future is going to look really quite different and is already starting to shape up differently, both in terms of what it offers. And I think we feel that branches are now much more of a relationship and advice hub as opposed to a transaction hub. They're there to deliver support and advice to members on key items and important parts of their financial well-being, as opposed to just coming in and queuing up to pay in checks or bags of cash. And I think also certainly an emerging trend that we see quite strongly at the moment is where will we expect to see branches more in the future? I think the pandemic has accelerated consumer behaviour quite significantly over the last 12 to 18 months. And I think the trends that we're seeing are being mirrored with footfall analysis elsewhere, which says that cities are quite slower coming back, but actually agricultural-based market towns are really thriving, and we're seeing footfall and transaction levels in places like that, they're at least as high as they were pre-pandemic. So I think there's a whole behavioural shift going on in terms of people's expectations, what they're looking for from a branch, and equally where they're going to find it.
Thanks, David. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there that we can pick up on. But Jonathan, is that something that sounds familiar to you? Obviously, from the perspective, from a very large building society and now a smaller one.
Yeah, I think that reflects the common experience, and I think another overlaying issue to that is, what do you do with the people in the branches? What are they there for, and do they have the right skills for the offer that you want for the future? So, is that a question of retraining, reskilling, or multi-skilling, or is it about hiring in different folk to that? The answer is probably a bit of both, but there needs to be an evolution of the member representative as we know it now.
Thanks for that. And Stewart, over to you next for some opening thoughts on how trends have manifested themselves in the use of branches.
Yeah, well, I think we can start with, COVID's clearly brought about itself some temporary situations that in some respects are starting to reverse out at the moment, but probably also pushed forward some digital thinking. I think what we've seen is definitely a lower frequency of transaction, but that's been happening before COVID and continues to happen. But what COVID has seen is quite significant change in the sense of regularity of transacting customers. And I think some of that's here to stay. But we have core groups of customers that are very, very reliant on this face-to-face branch on the high street, the vulnerable customers specifically. There's a fair proportion of those out there. And then I think what we are definitely seeing significant growth in is the requirement to sit down and spend time with people face to face, and more in an advice perspective, spending more time looking at more complex situations. And that's what we're seeing, and that's what our strategy is. Our organisational strategy has been focused on that for some time, and particularly putting branches into places where there's a bigger need for that than there is a transactional need.
Thanks for that, Stewart. And Joe, thinking about what you've just heard about some trends clearly that were in motion pre-pandemic, accelerated, and what some of the changes are coming out. How has that reflected in the kind of technologies that you're providing to the building societies, mutuals, credit unions that you work with?
So clearly, I'd agree with other panel members. We've seen a change, right? So COVID has accelerated that change, but the move towards digital was there way before COVID. It's been an accelerator. Accelerator. So what we're seeing as a technology provider is a lot more demand for our services, a lot more demand for our product, particularly as it can be very quickly implemented within a financial service environment. And also a need for some creative and innovative ways of thinking about the branch and how it fits in with that digital technology. Because the physical branch doesn't have to be exclusive to a digital provision. So what we're seeing is a lot more activity overall.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And thinking about the pandemic, which, as you say, accelerated a lot of the trends that we'd seen beforehand, as we hopefully are moving out of the pandemic. Do you think all of those changes are permanent? And are there some interesting things you've seen in terms of new behavioral shifts? So maybe we'll start with you this time, Stewart, on that question.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think we've seen a definite reduction. We saw a reduction in use of the branches. Now, that's clearly linked not necessarily to high streets reducing, seeing reduction of people using them these days and digitisation. There is a COVID specific thing that's in there. And this reduction, lengthening the time between visits, we're starting to see some of it come back, definitely, as people feel a bit more secure about things at the moment. But it's clearly never going to go back to where it was if we took ourselves back 2 years, because during the last 2 years, we've spent time helping people go online, use the telephone, use the apps. So we are moving people to give them that opportunity, to give them a choice. I think the key to this is for us has always been about giving choice. It's not about moving people from one channel to another. It's just choice of channel. That in itself, over time, will tell you where you should or shouldn't have branches because of the size of the size of the sort of the customer base around those branches. But then it says you've got to adapt your branch, the shape and style of the branches to suit what we're going to see in future. So us as an example, we've got community branches that are in partnership with others. So we've got a number of those where we've partnerships with local authorities, local community groups, and we actually put a branch with inside somebody else's building. And we've been doing that just before COVID started, and we continue to do that as we come out of COVID, because in actual fact, it means we can employ an affordable business model and provide all the services required using the digital technologies that are available to us.
Thanks for that. And Jonathan, has there been anything that surprised you, you know, in the kind of use of branches or some of the behavioral change that you've seen during the
I
course of the
mean,
pandemic?
I guess not surprised, but I guess more conversations are more complex now. So you know, aligned to everyone else on the panel, less transactional, and people are only coming in for complex conversation, whether that's a product conversation or they're a vulnerable customer or something has happened to them in their life. And I'd agree with Stewart there. You know, in terms of evolving the offer and the skill of the rep, you know, the member rep is really important in that, because if they can't have sensitive conversations and understand the root cause of a problem or an issue a member has, then the relevance of the branch becomes compromised, right? So it comes back to this the talent and the skill within that.
Yeah, absolutely. David, I can see you're shaking your head, or nodding your head rather. I'm assuming that you find much of that to agree with.
Yeah, certainly. I think definitely nodding on a number of levels. I think I said at the outset that the branches are becoming much more a centre for advice and help and support, as opposed to transactions. Transactions can be completed fairly straightforward and satisfactory way by different means. And so the branch is very much more a social community and advice hub. And certainly our branch refits of late have meet all of those requirements. We've created community space for groups to use the branches for meetings on the high street, looking to bring people to the high street for other reasons. Our offering is very much focused around advice and support. We're also really clear that the vast majority of our branch users are over 55. So we tailor our branches to suit the audience that come to the branch, whether that's our product range or the way we lay our branches out. We don't have counters, we have pods. People can either stand at the pod or they can sit down if they want to. I think, you know, we're really tailoring it to a specific market. I agree with Stewart around premises sharing. I think that's a really, really important element that will go forward. We have a premise sharing agreement with the Belvoir Group, who are a lettings and estate agency group, and we share premises in a number of locations, which makes for a good offer for people, but it also helps to manage the cost of running the branch. So I think for me, the themes and trends are absolutely consistent about advice and support and community, about how you share costs and enhance the proposition that's there, that you be unashamedly focused on your core market, which is not 25-year-olds or early 30-year-olds. They're not coming to branches, to the high street. We have digital capability to look after them. And I think when you add all of those things together, you've got the other emerging trend that we see, and which is where we should expect to see branches located more in the future and less in the future. You know, I think the types of people that we've talked about who want advice and help and support, who come to a high street fairly regularly as part of their everyday life, live in particular locations. And I think we'll see concentration of branches there. Whereas the more metropolitan sort of city typescapes, I expect to see less and less of our type of branches in those locations, because their relevance and the demand for them is not so high.
Yeah, and can I add something to that? So digital can obviously help upgrade that branch value as well. So as you've described, you're thinking about the customer needs and what the customers want, and the demographic of your customers will obviously influence that. But there's nothing to stop someone over 55 being a digital native, not native, but a digital user these days. And certainly, again, that's something that COVID has definitely accelerated. My mum is in her 80s. And I never thought I saw the day when she was happy to have a digital video call on a daily basis, for example. But digital can help with that branch value, in my opinion. And it's not about digital doing everything and being the be all and end all, but it's about replacing some of the traditional branch activities so that your branch personnel can be engaged in more useful activity as well. So that's the kind of innovative thinking that I think we've been asked to do with some of our customers recently.
I think also, Lisa, we've got a purpose about maintaining relevance for the high street. So by us evolving, we keep the focus on town centres or wherever we're located, because otherwise, if we shut branches, the wider economy would collapse in some ways. And part of our purpose is to help the communities we're in, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I definitely want to pick up on that kind of that role on the high street question. But just before we move on to that, Joe, one for you. I mean, we heard from all of the speakers that they need to change or upskill or shift the focus of the staff that are in branches. Presumably technology and the technologies you provide play a role in that and that upskilling piece for staff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's not just about the interaction with the customer, of course. It's also about interaction with the personnel and employees within the branches and within the financial service institutions. And it's also about intermediaries like brokers who may have an interest in being involved in that process as well. So what we do is we make the data of the customers accessible at every level within our platform so that everyone can access the same data points and be aware of what workflow is happening. So, for example, when someone comes into a branch, if they want to talk to someone about a mortgage, then that's a fairly complex flow of activity that needs to go on, and it's traditionally a very manual process. But we've identified that we can actually get very quickly to a decision in principle through digital means by accessing the data and making that available not just to the end user consumer who could get to it in entirely 100% digital means, but in the branch with a broker or with an advisor or with a relationship manager who can help them through that process. It just means you can speed things up if you can access information quickly and in a consistent manner.
So then presumably that helps the experience for customers, no matter what channel they're using, and for those employees of the branch, no matter where they're contacting or dealing or touching the customer.
The idea is to make it a consistent experience that's appropriate to every individual that you're talking to. So whether you're talking to an 80-year-old customer or a 25-year-old customer, you might want to offer different ways of engaging with them because they will expect different ways of engaging with them. It's just a question, as Dave has already said, of providing all those different channels for customers and making sure that it's appropriate to the customer's need.
I think combining the face-to-face and the digital, if you do it well, it creates the most exceptional personal experience. I think that's the thing. It's getting it right for both the colleague and for the customer. I think that's the thing. It's getting it right for both. But when we do it well, it works really well.
Yeah, and it's starting from the customer's perspective. So, what do they want? What do they need? And then how do you best deliver it? I think it's simple as that.
Yeah,
sometimes
exactly.
Organisations get very hung up on the technology elements, and we have to make sure that we keep focus on customer experience, which is the thing that matters at the end of the day.
Yeah. I compare it often to the terrible bank experience where you'll walk into a bank and you'll be faced with a bank of machines and nothing else. and you've got to get past the banking machine to speak to people, and that's the worst experience I think you could ever have. I think it's when they work together that's key.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think all of you have spoken to the ways in which the role of the branch is changing. Clearly, that some of the activity that will happen there perhaps is dealing with more complex or advisory type of activity. How do you ensure that people who have those more complex issues, who perhaps want to have a face-to-face conversation, how do you ensure that that experience does remain consistent for, whether you're young or old or whatever your age is? Sometimes you just want to speak to someone. So David, maybe we can go to you for that.
Yeah, and I think this is where you sort of have a complexity of human interaction and digitization together. So I absolutely accept the point that Joe made, that you can digitize back office routines and support functions to improve efficiency and deliver decisions and information quicker. I absolutely get that. I think the way that I look at it is the customer chooses their access point. So if a customer chooses to speak to you face to face, then you meet that with a similar response. You don't meet it with a digital response, which was sort of Stewart's big bank analogy, which is I went to a branch to talk to somebody and ended up with a machine. So I think there's a matching there that's very, very important. And so that's absolutely about meeting expectations. If someone takes the trouble to come to the high street, they come to speak to somebody, they don't come to speak to a machine. And that's really important. I think, to Joe's point, you can use systems and digitization to improve the support mechanisms that advisor has to deliver that service, and that ensures consistency and speed and efficiency. So I think when we talk about digitizing a branch, I think you might make careful you don't fall into the trap of a customer came to a branch to get some advice on a mortgage and spoke to a robot. However, if somebody wants to get some mortgage advice through their app on their phone, they're probably happy to speak to a bot, and an AI bot that takes them through a journey that leads them to a solution and an answer. So I think those things are both right for the circumstances, and you've got to match the entry point. So I think where you get complexity or you get misalignment of expectations is when your entry points get mixed up. And I think that's the skill of keeping the branch fresh but supported well with up-to-date efficiency in IT.
Thanks.
I think I'd add to that. Yeah, I'd add to that, Lisa. I say there's a culture issue as well, in that you've got to arm your frontline folk. If someone, to David's point, if they choose to come into a branch or choose to phone you, that they are empowered to make judgment calls as well within a framework rather than following a script. So that's really important, that the culture and the underlying kind of leadership allows that, and allows some freedom to think, really.
Yeah, John, the roles in branch are definitely becoming more complex these days. I think if you take a step back to when it was more highly transactional as an organisation, we don't see that these days. I mean, just to give an example, we've got a financial advisor in every single one of our branches, fully diploma qualified, fully utilised, diaries full all the time. We've got our customer advising staff all being highly brought up in the qualifications, because the requirement is there now. It's changing. That is the shape of the change, and people want to there's certain things want to see people face to face for, and there are times when that face to face may go digital, using video. But the fact is that the connection between a branch and somebody's home is just as easy if it's between two houses. So we're starting to see more and more need for video of those advisors, but in actual fact, the majority of access to them is face to face in the branch. So the meeting spaces, the shape, the design of a branch is really important these days.
Yeah, it's about reimagining the branch. And I think COVID has kind of focused the mind, hasn't it, in terms of your businesses as to what that reimagining is going to be about in the future, because things can happen that completely throw all your plans in terms of the direction that's going to go in and accelerate it to a vast extent.
Well, it
We,
did
we
that. I
might
mean,
even see clearly. Go on, sorry.
oh yeah, we'll say
Sorry.
through COVID, a great example during the last 18 months or so is that, we were seeing, we had diaries that were just full day to day for financial advisors that suddenly there was no access. So I had to switch to video
Yeah.
overnight almost. And it continued at the same pace, just it went to video. That was quite amazing how that shift happened. First of all, to get the financial advisors on a video to start with, but the second stage was the customers to respond the other way and accept it, and accept it. Really quite a change. But we're definitely seeing a move where customers still want to see people face to face physically. However, the digital side's still there, it's still sticking around. And I've just come off a meeting before this today where I'm leading a project to bring in a bespoke video facility for our guys. So it's significant movement, and this digitization is moving very fast.
And I think if you look at other parts of our lives, like access to doctors, for example, it's a very similar analogy, that people accept that there's a benefit in effectiveness and efficiency through making use of some of this digital access, but there's always going to be an element of need for some kind of personalization. It's not that that can't be provided via digital means, but there are different layers that you can add on depending on what the customer outcome needs to be.
You just don't want the debate, do you? You just don't want the debate at the moment you're getting with doctors, which is you can only see us via video rather than physical. That's the difference.
Yeah. I think we saw it nationwide as well, that we were training staff to spot signs of fraud, especially more elderly, vulnerable customers, and potentially domestic abuse. So there's that almost that back to that purpose and social care for our members that. You can only see that face to face. You couldn't tell it on a phone or on a, and probably if you're just on an app, how would you ever spot that? So there is that. Well, again, we go over
there are things you can do, obviously, to check the validity of the person, and I think again that's where the technology is available, but hasn't necessarily been applied in your environments at the moment.
It's not about checking the validity. This is about spotting signs of someone coming to a branch who has been defrauded by someone stood outside, or a woman who's in distress, right? So there is, again, it goes back to our kind of core values of care for our members, right?
I think that you've raised some really important points there, Jonathan, and it's something actually that I wanted to pick up on is there's the vulnerable customer, but one thing that became very clear during the pandemic when the face-to-face option, was no longer an option, is that not all technology is designed for accessibility. So, how do you ensure, vulnerability is one part of that, fraud and other, parts, other issues are part of that. But what about designing the digital for inclusion? There were lots of instances during the pandemic where that technology just didn't consider the needs of people whose needs weren't straightforward.
And there are accessibility standards that everyone has to adhere to. So it should be feasible to cater for those vulnerable customers. But there are always special nuances that need to be taken into consideration.
I think the challenge
I think for me.
Sorry, David.
Sorry, go ahead, David, and then we'll go over to Stewart after.
Okay, thank you. So I think for me, what holds the key here is the evolution and development of how video technology and digital technology combine to create a personalized customer experience. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And I think that will hold the key to the future of the branch network. And I think it is going to be interesting to see how the richness of combining secure methods of transferring documents and authorizations with video in a seamless way I think will really hold the key to the number and the roles of branches going forward. I think we've already moved through that transaction phase where we know that transactions can be done quickly and more efficiently by technology. But I think we've all agreed at the start of this panel that why people come to branches is to get that richness of experience for advice and help with complex needs. And at the moment, I think video is in the early stages of meeting that. So Stewart uses video. We've been using video in branches for, I don't know, maybe 5 years. We're developing that video with Virgin Media all the time, but we're still using it point to point in branches. It will go to homes at some point, and the security side of that will be critical in terms of creating the right secure environment. But I think it's all there, and I think it's going to be a fascinating to watch how it evolves and develops. And we have an obsession about security, and so we should do. And so I think it'll be interesting how that evolves over time to enable that video development to continue to flow through.
Yeah, we have it built in and integrated into our flow already. So we use video touch points at the appropriate points where we feel it's going to add value to that customer experience. So again, back to that customer experience. And clearly security is a big part of that. You raise the issue of potential fraud. So it's really important that in as a part of that ID&V process at the beginning of a relationship with a customer, that you're checking they are the person they say they are. And so using video to check liveness, for example, to make sure it's a real person, not just a picture of someone, is something you can very easily integrate into that digital flow.
Yeah, I think the thing we have to remember as well, though, is that we talked about vulnerable people here, and the most vulnerable people don't necessarily have access to digital. So this is the challenge. The challenge isn't actually making it available and having the systems. It's the ability to access it. During some real challenging times back in the last 18 months, when we had the risk of closing branches, we created a relationship with the post office to give access to cash to any post office branch. And it was basically a barcode. But to actually get that to work for those most vulnerable people was the most challenging part of it. It was actually, have they got a mobile? Can they use a barcode? How do we transfer it to them? It wasn't as easy as it should have been because they were the most vulnerable. So that's the challenge.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, Stewart, because you're also talking about the richness of relationships that exist in our types of business, which don't exist in large banks. And so that absolute top echelon of what you'd call CRM, which we deliver particularly well in the building society sector. I mean, we had staff going out doing shopping for customers in the pandemic who couldn't get out of their house. You know, that's taking CRM to another level. But that's really what gives that extra special sort of sense of being a member is all about.
Yeah, Jonathan, you also spoke to that sense of purpose and responsibility for communities. Do you think that, staff training comes into this? So recognizing behavior on video, for example, might be a different set of skills than identifying.
It could be, yeah. I mean, it could be. I mean, it does come back to that training and listening to the front line and what they need and what they see and hear as well. And I think that's culture, and I think mutuals have that running through the DNA, which perhaps others don't. But that is part of our inherited, way of working.
Jonathan, I think back in the day when Nationwide launched their video, they paid higher salaries, didn't they, to video staff, if I remember rightly?
I think they did, yeah. It was a long time ago, yeah. Not anymore.
Clearly it's changed, hasn't it? Become it's normalised. That's the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, something I wanted to pick up on that all of you mentioned, there's the sense of purpose for the mutual sector, but there's also the role that they play on high streets. So David, I think you mentioned this, that in some areas post-pandemic, given the kind of hyper localization that we've seen and people working much closer to where they live and so on, that branch traffic has actually increased in some of those areas. So, all of you mentioned some of the creativity used, but what is the role of the branch on the high street and ensuring that they remain thriving, that they enable thriving businesses and lively communities?
I think rather than the high street, I'd probably talk about the community. I think that, a branch team, because it's not the bricks and mortar that goes out and supports the community. It's the people that work in the branches. A building society team has an important part to play in being a member of the community and supporting the community. We tend to focus on a number of things particularly. So we like to support elements around employability, financial awareness and homelessness. So our teams are out and about in their local communities supporting those types of activity, and making sure that we're doing our bit and contributing to the well-being and to the and to the strength of the community. I think I touched a little bit earlier on the fact that we've also now starting to make our branches available to community groups to use for meetings and to get together and to run workshops in those meetings and for other community groups. So just becoming an integral fabric of your community and being seen to support what's important to the people who live around your branches, I think is important and more distinct than just supporting the high street. I think it's supporting the community from which you live and operate.
And there's an argument, isn't there, that if you focus your branches for those more vulnerable customers and those that really want that experience, if you provide for the rest of your customers, who might be millennials, they might be younger people who might be much more accepting of a digital experience, and you can really focus on the rest of them for your branch experience. So you're able to optimize both effectively, is a thought. So there's an opportunity for you there to maximise for that specific group who will benefit most from the community approach.
Yeah, definitely, because if I look at Beehive Money, and it's a very different cohort of people, we've got nearly 60,000 people saving with us to buy their first home in ELISA. They're all digital, they're all on an app. Our community ethos is very different. We take broader sort of themes there, and support those, and with a very much a strong focus on the environment and ethics. So I think you can shape your community values to your brand and to your access points, to make them as relevant as you possibly can. I think that's the key. It's the relevance. How does it feel relevant to me as a member of either Beehive Money or the local Nottingham Building Society branch, and make me feel part of that community, is really what you're looking to engender in your members as much as possible.
And what about you, Stewart? Do you see branches serving the communities in the same way, whether it's on a high street or more broadly defined community, as David's just outlined?
Yeah. I think we sound like the most amazing sector at the moment, because we, very similarly, so we've been providing community spaces to customers for a few years now, but we even bring our local coffee makers into it, and free coffee, and let them basically make use of it all day long as a benefit. But I think we've got such an interest in the high street. We can't save the high street. We can't be the white knight, but what we can be is part of a movement to try to retain the high streets and maintain them, because it's community at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. So we see that these communities need to exist. People need them to thrive. One of my board directors is actually a board director on the High Street Task Force. So it kind of shows you the commitment we've put into high streets themselves, but also the engagement we want to have with it, and the influence we'd like to take with it as well. So we do see a branch as being a key point on a high street, a key point for community, providing services to those who need them. But what we definitely believe in is to keep and to grow our digital side of our business, to be able to provide the services in whichever way a customer wants to access them. We know that'll in time mean we need to advance our network and make changes. They need to be in the right places, but that's just part of an ever evolving model. At the end of the day, we have to keep evolving. We can't stand still. We might be 160 years old, but we've got to keep evolving.
And Jonathan, over to you. Do you see that same link between a role of presence on the high street and serving your community, but also an additional question for you? Does it play an important role in bringing customers in, when they're first opening an account? For example, in the US, there was always a strong correlation between physical presence and winning new customers. Or do you think the world has moved on from that?
I agree with what everyone else has said about we play a vital role in those communities that we operate in, and we provide local employment, which is really important, rather than being a faceless out of town centre. I think, is it relevant? Probably not for younger folk, but it is a kind of almost like a marketing opportunity as well, in the sense of, if you see, so you're walking down the high street, you come out of the pub or the coffee shop and it's there, it's almost free marketing. So I think it's helpful, but it's not going to drive the Generation Z and below towards the new apps. But it's part of the fabric of the community, and I think that's what's really important about the building society movement. And to what Stewart said, we've been around 150, 60 years. We have the opportunity to be relevant for the next 50 or 100 years, and we're not hidebound by short-term shareholders to do that. But it's unquestionable, we have to evolve, right?
I think statistics exist, don't they, that having a branch on a high street to support the brand. I think we've done a matching against intermediary mortgages. If we've got a branch in a certain location, we will definitely see higher return on our mortgages because of that. It's part of a business model. At the end of the day, you have to see it from all different parts to make it work, but it definitely works.
And I think that's right. I think any physical presence is always going to support and augment a brand perception and awareness. But I think also increasingly doing that in a clever way will play a part. And we touched a little bit earlier about starting to evolve the branches as we're doing and as Stewart's doing by putting it into different places, sharing premises, putting yourself into different environments, so that the branch isn't a classic marble hall with a counter and some interview rooms that look like a prison cell.
You're not painting a pretty picture there, David. Joe, I think you wanted to come back on something.
Oh no, I was just going to say, having been around for 150 years, the thing that the building societies have got to contend with is a lot of legacy technology systems as well. So that's always something that has to be taken into consideration. The nice thing about new technology like FinTech OS technology is we now provide these low-code environments where you can integrate with the data you've already got, but show a more modern front to that data. So there are more options for you now than there have been. The great thing about building societies is they have survived 150 years, most of them. I mean, a lot of you have all merged together and become less, and I'm sure there'll be more of that as time goes on. But it's the ones who are prepared to innovate and to think forward who are the survivors, in my view.
Thanks for that, Joe. And I like the way you've got longevity, but you've also got legacy. And they change is possible for long-standing institutions with that core sense of purpose that we've spoken about in the mutual sector. We've just got a few minutes left, so I just wanted to pass to each of you for one final question. Will you still be on the high street in 20 years' time? First to you, David.
Yes, we will. Will we look different from today? Yes, we will. So I think I'll answer it with a double yes.
Thanks. And I hope they'll look different from what you described earlier. Over to you, Jonathan.
Well, ours don't look like that today, so that was more
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I agree with David. The offer will look different, and and who knows? I can't look forward 20 years, but it will change. But I think there's a desire in humans to have physical contact, in their transactions, and that will evolve in some shape or form across the whole high street and retail sector. Notwithstanding that the digital element will clearly grow and become more sophisticated, right?
And over to you next, Stewart.
I am absolutely certain we'll still be here. Exactly how it'll look, I couldn't say. I think that's a long time. COVID's only been nearly 2 years, and it's changed a lot in 2 years, hasn't the world? But I think the reality is yes. I think if I looked at our own business, I'd expect to be in more locations, but different type of locations. So I expect yes and more locations. So that'll be an interesting one, won't it?
Yeah, interesting. And finally, to you, Joe, will you still be working with building societies?
Will I still be working with them? Yeah. I think we'll be working with them more and more because it's all about the cost point, and I know what these organisations have been subjected to in the past. You need a digital solution that can scale and that can integrate to the legacy technology you've already invested in. So yeah, I expect to be selling our services to building societies.
Brilliant. Well, I just want to thank all my panelists. Thank you, David, Jonathan, Stewart, and Joe. It's a fantastic conversation. To everyone watching, please keep your questions coming. I'm sure the speakers would be happy to respond to any questions you have, either in the chat or through the People's tab. Again, go visit our partners in the expo area, join the networking sessions, lots to do. So thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.